WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. By the time we get it all together, the Pittsburgh Steelers headed to Baltimore this week. Tomlin doesn't control the press box, or I would have a press pass, but Luke Jones will be there. And it's not even going to be cold on Sunday night, even though they flexed this thing out. I know it's been very difficult with all of us seeing our breath and seeing just a really strange game, Christmas Eve, not a lot of people there, cold as hell, backup quarterback against whatever the Ritter guy was. Luke Jones joins us now. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be out in Owings Mills all week long, and we have gone up and down the river on the $200 million question about whether Lamar Jackson will be available, not available, PCLs, playoff games. They are a playoff team at this point. Luke, offense aside, let's talk defense here a little bit. And, I know I got out in front of it last week and said if they take the ball away, they'll win the game, and they did. And punching the ball is what Marlon Humphrey does, and what they do. A lot of the guys tackling the ball. Defensively, where are you with this unit? And certainly seeing them run around without Calais Campbell, without Marcus Peters on a day when you couldn't throw the football. I think Sunday will be a little different. I mean, Pickett can throw the football. They will be able. The weather conditions will allow for a more normal game this week.
Yeah, I think it'll just be a question of how well Kenny Pickett fares. I mean, if you had a chance to watch that Christmas Eve night game, against the Raiders in Pittsburgh, really underwhelming until the final drive that won the game. I mean, it really, he's a rookie quarterback in the same way, not the same way because he was a first round pick, unlike Desmond Ritter. You see some flashes, you see some potential, but you see lots of not so great play. And I think when you're talking about a team like the Ravens, we focus so much on the offense. And look, I'm as guilty of that as anyone. But you do look at this defense, and I get it. They haven't exactly played a murderer's row of quarterbacks. You kind of look at where they've been since the bye week. They've only given up more than 14 points once in their last 7 games. That's still saying something, even if it's not a list of juggernaut offenses that they've played. I mean, 13 allowed against New Orleans before the bye, 3 to Carolina, who has since benched and released their quarterback who played that day. They had the game against Jacksonville, which until the fourth quarter, they had done a nice job defensively against Trevor Lawrence. But Denver, Russell Wilson held to 9 points, held Pittsburgh to 14, Cleveland to 13, and then, of course, 9 points on Christmas Eve against Cleveland, or against Atlanta, excuse me. I mean, the defense has been good. Does it bend a little more than you'd like in terms of, okay, you're going against lesser opponents? How does that translate to if they're going up against Buffalo or Kansas City or Cincinnati in week 18? It's hard to say. I do think they're a little more vulnerable in the secondary than they'd like to be, given the health of corner. And with Marcus Peters being out right now, not that Brandon Stevens played poorly on Saturday, but how does that translate? How does Kyle Hamilton playing the nickel translate against higher octane passing games? When you get into the playoffs.
Well, they drafted him for this, right? Literally.
I mean, they drafted him to be a starting safety ultimately, but the position he's in right now is out of necessity. They don't trust any of their other corners. I mean, Kyle Fuller went down in week 1 with the season-ending knee injury. Pepe Williams and Jalen Armour-Davis, the 2 corners they drafted in the 4th round, they still may blossom into useful, productive players for them, but they're not really guys that they trust as rookie cornerbacks at this point. So you really have, and we've talked about this, even before Peters got hurt in the Cleveland game, they really have 2 corners that they trust. And a lot of people would tell you, well, maybe the Ravens trust him, but a lot of people aren't trusting Marcus Peters, but as much as they did in the past. And that's fair. I'll hear that, but he's still certainly a starting caliber corner, wherever you want to rank him.
They're going to throw in that direction before they throw in Humphreys.
Yeah, sure, exactly. I mean, that's what was, it's kind of interesting on Saturday to see, Marlon Humphrey kind of really locked down and at times travel with Drake London, and Drake London made some plays. I mean, say this much, that guy could play for my team, but Marlon Humphrey made the big play with the punch out after the conversion pass downfield. So, the defense is, they've given up a little more against the run the last couple weeks, but keep in mind, Cleveland and Atlanta are, they're not great offenses overall, but they are high quality running attacks. So not surprised or overly concerned about that. Keep in mind, Calais Campbell wasn't out there this past week. So I think the defensive line overall did a good job filling in. But, they gave up some yardage. They gave up some drives in the second half. One thing, beyond just talking about the secondary, their late half defense continues to be shakier than you'd like it to be, quite frankly. And that worries me when you consider looking ahead to the playoffs and some of the offenses you'll face in those scenarios. But by and large, you look at the body of work. This is played. Since Roquan Smith's arrival, this has played much more like a top 5 kind of defense. It hasn't been perfect. I don't think it's great, but it's certainly been good to very good. And again, the opponents, you can't control who's on your schedule, so I get that. So from that standpoint, you see what happened on Sunday. I mean, or Saturday, Atlanta in the second half moved the ball a little bit more than you'd probably like, but 0 for 4 inside the red zone. We've talked a lot about the Ravens' offensive woes inside the red zone. How about the defense? 0 for 4 Atlanta was going into the red zone. So, it you don't want to hang your hat and be too satisfied because you are going up against Desmond Ridder. But at the same time, they did what you want them to do. You go into that game and say, hey, if you hold the Falcons to 9 points, and you mentioned this, whether you take the ball away or not, you hold a team to 9 points, you should win, especially when you're playing at home. So, it wasn't overly flashy as far as the entire game, but certainly the Ravens defense, they did what they were supposed to do and they got the job done. And it's something save for the Jacksonville game since the bye week, that's something that they've held up their end of the bargain. Even the Cleveland game,
even the referees pitched in on the
sure.
I mean,
yeah, Arthur Smith not sending a holiday card to this officiating crew.
It
was
one of the worst calls I've ever seen on the 1 yard line to call to say you're throwing the ball away when his arm got hit. It was the way his arm got hit, the ball went up in the air, like all of it. It was awful. It was a terrible call, and it dramatically affected the game. I mean, it affected the Ravens season in a positive way, so why are we going to complain? But it was terrible, terrible. And the officiating and all the way around as it relates to gambling, and as I watch it, I don't talk much gambling with you, but when I talk to other people, I'm like, I'm still in the early stages of the gambling part of this and how all of these calls affect how people make money these days. And it's bizarre to me. It really is.
Yeah. And I mean, I keep coming back to, and we've talked, this I'm sure will be another off-season discussion, but I keep coming back to the idea of a sky judge, have an official up in the booth that's kind of looking at this and saying, hey, that one was missed, or, hey, this one needs to be called. I think some kind of
doing balls and strikes in baseball now, right? Like,
I mean, I just feel you need some overhead to. I've said over and over, I don't even know. So many people say the officiating's worse than ever. I don't know about that. That's not to say that it's as good as it needs to be. Let's be clear. Those are different items. I think HD television, more and more social media coverage, more and more plays that go viral and clips that go viral on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. I think you have that. And I just think these players continue to be bigger, stronger, faster. And just like balls and strikes with an umpire, where you're talking about pitchers who throw 100 miles per hour and pitchers who have wizard-like breaking stuff. The ball breaks so much that I think the human eye is just not equipped to be able to catch everything, meaning being correct all the time.
Not to get everything right.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's why if you can have a little more overhead, this kind of speed. I don't want this to become where you can challenge every single play or anything like that.
I just don't want him to get it egregiously wrong.
Right, exactly. And that's why if you have a sky judge, something along those lines, upstairs, who's like, hey, fix this. Like, this is what happened. Trust me, and that would be a trained official too. Like, I'm not saying it's just some random guy up there, random guy or gal just buzzing down. It would be part of the process. So, but yeah, I mean, you see some of that, and I hear you. I mean, especially with gambling and.
Well, I'll just say this, right? I watched the most crooked thing ever, right? I watched the World Cup for the last month.
Yeah.
And I'm a World Cup watcher, right? I mean, I've watched the last 7 or 8 World Cups pretty hardcore all day. Morocco games at 3 a.m. I watch the sport and I've enjoyed it. every time it would happen, so I went to the Cup in 6, 10 was South Africa, 14, Jen was in the hospital during all of that. I remember watching it, and I get so disappointed with it because of the diving and all that. I'll say this, dude, just flat out. As a 54-year-old American, sports has been my life, and I've watched a lot of sports. They've really made it better. Like the World Cup, the officiating, the calls, the diving, the reviews. I'm telling you, I'm a pissy American about the diving and the divas and
Mm,
bringing out the stretchers and all that. I don't watch enough soccer with Premiership and knowing enough around it. I can just tell you in a 4-year chunk, this was a much better tournament because the officiating was better. Like,
yeah,
and the diving was less and the goofy, it was freaking business. You know what I mean? Like, I watched these teams play all the way through, all the really good teams into the quarters, into the semis. Officiating was not something that was a problem, and letting it get out of hand, and the language barriers that you would have in the World Cup.
right.
I just would say with the NFL every week there's 5 calls and you're like, come on, man, just get the call right. You have the video, you have the evidence. You know, it's like when I see a guy's jersey getting tugged in the secondary the whole way. Like
Yeah,
there was a play, maybe it was Humphrey, it was a play over the weekend where like the guy had body contact all 15 yards. He never let go of the wide receiver. And then at the end, the ball got swatted away, and they're like, that's good defense. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
okay. But the NFL and officiating as it relates to gambling and as it relates to getting it wrong. And we're talking about our game the other day, cold as hell. Nobody cares. Well, Arthur Smith cares, right? Desmond Ritter cared. And it was just a terrible call. And it's a call they could have gotten right. And I want to see them get better. And I know you do with
yeah.
baseball too. Like
Sure.
baseball's another thing for years. They take a timeout now. They go into the well. They come back. They out is out and safe is safe. And we get it right. As opposed to the 85 World Series where Denkinger gets and the whole
Yeah,
thing goes
sure,
football,
sure.
right? That's not happening as much in other sports. Football's got an issue with this. You know what I mean? Like you're just getting it right.
I think at its core, and I agree with you, and I'm not saying the officiating is fine. I already said I'd love to see a sky judge. I think that would be a very helpful solution. And I don't want to say solution meaning it fixes everything, but I think that would be a very encouraging, good step. But it would also not not restrict the game in terms of making it much longer. I think at some point in time, I think here's the difference. You mentioned out or safe. That's an objective call at the end of the day, right? Now, you might have to slow it down so much to really see whether it was truly an out or runner is safe at first base. The problem is so many of these calls in football, there's still subjectivity. As much as you want to try to make passer or pass interference or intentional grounding or holding. I mean, there's one. I mean, I could vividly recall it fondly. John Madden saying, "Oh, you could call holding on every play if you wanted to." I mean, that's just the nature of it. So that's where I think it's tough because you just use pass interference as an example where the analyst in the booth might say, "Hey, that's really good defense," and you're saying, "Well, that looks like pass interference." You're going to have that on every single play where it's something objective or something subjective. So I think that's where we struggle here in terms of creating a standard of what everyone wants, right? I'll say this, the last thing I want is games where you're going to have 22 combined penalties and there's a flag every other play. I hate football like that. However, if you acknowledge that, that means fewer flags. That means inevitably, yeah, some penalties are going to be missed and some fouls are going to be missed. So that's where it's just, it is, I do think it's something that needs to be addressed. And that's why I've said I've been an advocate of a sky judge for a long time. But at the same time, you do have to walk a fine line between wanting to have well officiated games, but also still remembering it's entertainment. And we don't want this to break down and suddenly you're talking about games that are lasting 4 hours because you're having more reviews or more discussions among the officials, whatever. You have to be able to do it in a way where it can still be streamlined so it doesn't upset the flow of the game and the pace of the game. So I think it's more complicated. I guess this is my my long version of saying it's more complicated, I think, than a lot of people want to make it out to be. However, I agree. Yes, there are elements to this that should be addressed and that need to be better. There's no question about it. Because of what you mentioned, there is more gambling involved than ever, and all that. And even if you're not a gambler, you want competition to be as fair as possible. Are you going to make it perfect? No. You're going to miss calls on both sides. Saturday was a great example. So many Ravens fans over the years have thought the league's out to get the Ravens. Saturday was an example of some
Dude,
of the
you're on the
calls were
1 yard line. Your ass is backed up to the goal line. You're about to give up a touchdown, and all of a sudden, this phantom call just it changed the game. I mean, it
yeah,
really did. It
can sure
completely changed the game.
it sure can. I mean, there's no question about that. So I mean,
Well, back
it's
to the defense and where we are. I mean, I feel like Calais Campbell will get back on the field. Peters, I don't know, right? I mean, and again, leg injuries, cornerback,
tough.
right where we are with Lamar. That I am a little more concerned about the back end when it comes time to see Josh Allen or
Yeah.
Mahomes, whatever that's going to be. And they may in this first round game wind up getting something cupcakeish. And be careful what you wish for, because if you go win the division, you might wind up seeing Miami.
Well, at this point,
Maybe
how
not.
about it? How about at this point, going the possibility of going to Jacksonville again, and look at how Trevor Lawrence has played. I mean, let's face it, you might get yourself in a position where your first round matchup is not so bad, right? And we've said I fully believe the Ravens are good. I just don't know if they're any better than that. What does good mean? Well, they're 10-5, right? They've
Does
clinched a
good mean
playoff
you're going to
spot,
win 3 games in a row on the road against great teams
and that's what's
after
tough.
not playing anybody since the Giants? You're
Yeah,
bragging about them playing the Giants in Week 6, like it's like
yeah,
wow. I mean,
and they
they've
lost.
really played some bad teams. They haven't had
Oh,
a
and they
chance to show it.
lost that. Well, you just mentioned the Giants. They lost that game. It's not as though okay, the Giants they lost that game, right? I mean, so they were 3-3 at that point, and since
With a
then they've
healthy
played.
Lamar throwing healthy interceptions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's that said, if this team's going to make a run, of course, it starts with a healthy Lamar Jackson on the field. I don't think anyone disputes that, right? I mean, they're not. God bless Tyler Huntley. He's better than a lot of backup quarterbacks, but you see the limitations the more and more he plays. I think that's evident, and that's the case with any backup quarterback, really, save for maybe a couple in
That
this
would be the
league.
case of every team in the league that looked at him and said he's a free agent quarterback.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
He's a nice scout team quarterback for this offense and for what this team does.
right. I mean, look how many points the Eagles scored with Gardner Minshew against Dallas on Saturday. But if he has to keep playing, as was the case with him in Jacksonville a couple years ago, probably you see his limitations shine through a little bit more. Although that Eagles roster, top to bottom, deeper and better than where the Ravens are right now. So, I just think you're going to lean. The defense is going to be a big part of this. If we're talking about this team in the divisional round, or dare I say beyond that, the defense is going to have a major place in this. So, yeah, when you talk about Marcus Peters and the health of his calf, talk about Calais Campbell and his knee, those are injuries which, again, not suggesting they're season ending, but when they do get back on the field, how close to 100% are they going to be? I mean, we were talking about Marcus Peters. It's a guy coming back from a torn ACL, and we've seen the ups and downs of his performance here in 2022. Now you add a calf injury, which is tough, especially for someone that's speed and change of direction. I think that's tricky. So, that's another reason why I do feel a little more vulnerability looking at this secondary than you'd like to see, just knowing how these heavyweights in the AFC like to throw the football. So, but that's when you go back to, hey, what's the weather going to look like if you have to go to Kansas City? If you have to go to Buffalo, what's the weather going to be like? The elements it could be a scenario where that passing game's neutralized a little bit,
Well, if the
more than
passing
normal.
game's neutralized, I learned this last weekend. So's the kicking game.
No doubt, no doubt. But by the way, and it didn't come up in the post game because they won. And normally, I'm not going to sit there and question anytime you send Justin Tucker out there, but trying the 55-yarder there, that felt a little odd. That felt like one of those where
He's
let's
not making this.
punt the ball, and
Yeah.
and part of that had to do with how much the kickers were struggling in the pregame. I mean, my goodness, it didn't reach 20 degrees, right? I mean, you're kicking a rock in that cold weather. So again, I don't want to nitpick too much about that because we've seen Justin Tucker make 66-yard field goals, right? I mean,
Yeah, this
He's
isn't
capable, but
PlayStation. It's 12 degrees out.
yeah,
Right?
this wasn't
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
wasn't doing that indoors in Detroit like he did last year when he did that. So I thought that was a little strange, but overall, I mean, clearly you're not worried about Justin Tucker. So but it comes back to this defense, and we mentioned him in passing at one point, but Roquan Smith, 15 tackles, one for a loss. I mean, he continues to lead the way for that defense, and
He getting paid.
you would think so. Although I still struggle, not because I don't want the Ravens to re-sign Roquan Smith, but until there's any resolution as far as what's going to happen with Lamar Jackson, I feel like everything else is just they're details right now. I mean, if you don't know what's happening with your quarterback position, what else actually matters until you have that figured out. So it's the one thing I'd say about that. But Roquan Smith doing everything he can, whether it's the Ravens or someone else, he's going to get paid. There's no question about that, because he's definitely made a difference for this team after arriving in early November.
Certainly where they had a glaring deficiency at that position.
Sure.
Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him out on the interwebs all week long. He'll be in Owings Mills. We are post-holiday getting ready for Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh week around here. Game's been flexed into the evening, which gives us a nice day of red zone football on Sunday. So looking forward to that. And then Cincinnati next week. And of course, the Ravens are a playoff team. We will not lose sight of that, although I'm not seeing the purple flamingos on the lawn right now. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore positive.